My name is Matt Hughes. I'm editor-in-chief of the up-and-coming tech publication Top Business Tech, and I'll be chairing a panel today on the future of MedTech in today's new normal, the byproduct of COVID-19. Today I have with me some fantastic guests on the panel. So we've got Richard Hall, MD of PDM, Phil Sheppard, Research Associate of the Centre of Sustainable Manufacturing and Recycling Technologies, also known as SMART, Ian Sharp, MD of the Future Health Innovations, and Mary Hopkins, Head of Business Systems and Informatics at NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership. So thank you everyone for being here. What I'd like to do first is just get some brief introductions from each of you individually. So if we start from left to right, Ian Sharp, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So Future Health Innovations is my consultancy, and we help early stage digital tech startups in the health and social care field devise their products, design their product, and find funding to get the early stage proof of concept work done and develop it into a situation where it can be trialed and evaluated at market.
Cool, thank you. Richard, do you want to go next?
Hi, morning everybody. My name is Richard Hall, Director of PDM. PDM is effectively an innovation agency. So we get involved in early stage research, development, prototyping, engineering and manufacture of products. And a high proportion of our work is medical devices and life sciences. And we work very closely with the NIHR, and we've been around about 16 years now.
Okay, great. Phil?
Yes, hello. I'm Phil Sheppard from the Centre for Sustainable Manufacturing and Recycling Technology at Loughborough University. We've been working in the field of the circular economy for about 20 years in other sectors, but recently we've started looking at small medical devices. And so what the perspective I'm bringing is most of you will be interested in the sort of functionality of medicines and medical device innovation. We're interested in that, in supporting that, but from a sort of environmental sustainability perspective. So I'll be talking about that during the session.
Great, and finally, Mary, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Mary Hopkins. I work within NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership as the Head of Business Systems and Informatics. Shared Services was created in 2011 with the Welsh Government trying to sort of draw greater efficiencies and economics of scale by bringing together professional and business services to ensure that frontline staff can focus on what is important so we can deal with the business and professional side of things.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So obviously the new normal is at the forefront of everyone's minds. The pandemic has obviously caused seismic shifts in the way the entire world works, from businesses to individuals, causing sort of mass self-reflection, adaptation, and huge change in a variety of fields. So one of those businesses and entrepreneurs who's sort of taken this challenge on, Richard Hall, who's helped develop a lot of PPE equipment, leading some of the sort of face shields that have been gone out there. If you could tell us a bit more about how PDM came to be, Richard, and the story behind it, and sort of the impact of your actions and how that's affected the sort of pandemic.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matthew. As I said earlier, anybody that's kind of joining us now, so I run an innovation agency which involves research and development and prototyping and manufacture of medical devices and also life sciences. We've worked with NIHR for quite a number of years and medical device manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result of that, we do work very closely with surgeons. So I remember almost a year ago receiving a phone call late one night from a surgeon who kind of informed me of the pending PPE. And this is kind of before it became a thing a year ago. Now, bearing in mind that the surgeon in question is usually very cool and very calm and very collected. So the tone of kind of was a call to arms. I think without kind of even thinking about it, you know, it's kind of system one thinking and let's just react and try and see how we can help. I mean, the reality is that we've got, at that time, 15 years of experience in medical devices. So we knew the drill, what we had to do in terms of clinical insight and prototyping, validation and verification. And effectively, a high proportion of the business pivoted just to focus on this, a reusable face shield. The main drivers were that it was not 3D printed because of the time of actually 3D printing a face shield, so it was laser cut, looking at low capex. So all of these kind of design inputs came to the project, and we rapidly worked with a laser cutting company, and very quickly got the iterative prototype to the surgeon and developed it into a final solution. By the time we'd done the design sprint, the PPE crisis had really kicked in, and it's kind of fair to say that it kind of scared a lot of people. But I think by that time our mindset was just focused on getting the job done and the call to arms. And because the crisis had really kind of kicked in, and we were aware of the CE marking requirements, we then submitted the face shield for CE marking with Intertech, which was expedited. So then we had it CE marked, and this thing's kind of built and built and built. We then kind of realised that rather than look for distribution, we may as well manufacture this thing ourselves. So we manufactured the first batch of 1,500, and through all the connections through LinkedIn, various people that we know, we supplied a vast quantity to Harrogate Hospital, St George's, and also other applications. So nobody was furloughed within the business. There are 5 people within the business. As I say, it was just a system one thinking process, just a reactive thing. We didn't know where we were going with this thing. We didn't know how the business would kind of cope with it. All of our design costs and prototyping and manufacturing CE marking were absorbed by the innovation agency PDM. So I think for us, in terms of the impact, it's actually made the business stronger. We've been around since 2005, and we'd had a knock, obviously with the previous recessions in 2008, etc. But I think the main thing is that it made me really proud to be part of the medical device community, and also that we did our bit. Kind of fast forward to this year, 2021. I actually feel energized about 2021, and I don't know if that's a rebound from 2020. Obviously, we're in another lockdown, so there's a really good review on Harvard Business Review about people being fatigued in lockdown too. We're not kind of feeling that at the moment, so we're putting measures in place to make sure that we maintain energized. I think my final comment on this is that we've kind of drawn positives from it. I think for us the future's bright. We've got the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the vaccine, although we realise that I don't know what the new normal will actually look like, but generally it's made the team stronger and the business more robust. It's been a good stress test. So I think on balance, being an entrepreneur and running a business, I can only really draw positives. So that was kind of our experience of it, really.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing your journey there, Richard. Okay, so we'll take that over to Phil. So Phil, as a sort of another sort of industry that's sort of come into medical research and tech at the centre of smart, how has your business sort of shifted its typical focus to more a medical focus and sort of using that circular design that you mentioned?
Well, this is more coincidental, really. For about 20 years, we've been working in other sectors, recycling technologies in other sectors, in particular footwear and automotive. So, for example, in automotive in particular, one thing is automated disassembly of cars into their components. So it's kind of coincidental because we were looking to go into this anyway, looking at the circular economy for small medical devices. So you have larger imaging equipment and so on, which is already has a good circular economy model with companies taking back equipment that they own actually and then refurbishing it and leasing it again. But for small medical devices, these are typically handheld or portable devices, various kind of monitors, inhalers, IV equipment, and so on. these many of these are either designed for single use and a sort of linear process where they end up in a dump or are converted to energy, or there's some contamination issue, which means that by a sort of false assumption or a too precautionary assumption, they go into a destruction route where a bit more intelligence in design would mean they wouldn't need to do that. So it hasn't involved a change in direction for us, but has given this focus even more relevance. There are about 4,500 items of small medical device in the MRHA database, and we're developing a funding proposal at the moment. We're just about to submit, which would seek to introduce circular economy design, circular economy materials, so that involves materials discovery if necessary, as well as material selection, configurable reprocessing lines, and also management of the whole system. So from a sort of operational point of view, that proposal would look at all this and seek to introduce innovations in all these respects. The main benefits, I think, arising out of it, apart from the environmental resource savings, are cost. The pandemic has identified huge costs, not least things like PPE, huge costs from just single use. And there are studies that have indicated that the minimum savings that could be made, this is the minimum, is 20% savings by weight in terms of reusing or reprocessing or recycling medical devices, of which small medical devices are by far the majority. And also there is also work to show that reprocessing of devices, even those that are designed for single use, could save about 50% of the cost of buying new. So if you scaled that up to a significant proportion of small medical devices used in the UK, that's savings in the order of hundreds of millions of pounds from safe reuse. So there's a lot of potential there for the NHS, I think, to make savings out of this. And finally, another benefit, I think, is identifying mechanisms of COVID and other virus deactivation through things like UVC light, which could make reprocessing easier with regard to providing safety guarantees. So that's where we're at the moment. We're just about to submit this proposal with quite a range of partners up and down the supply chain, including some connections in the US. So we hope that's going to get funded.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. A bit of a echo through your computer there. You mute yourself quick.
Oh, okay. I'll try and address that.
Lovely. Ravi, thanks for the question. What we'll do, we'll get to your questions right at the end of the panel. What I'll do next is move on to Ian. So, Ian, if you could sort of give us a bit of insight, obviously with the sort of big change and things like COVID, it birthed a lot of innovative new startups who are sort of destined to change the world and help the world for the better. How has the pandemic sort of helped health tech and MedTech startups in the view of, or in the sort of investor's perspective? So what are you looking for?
Yeah, really interesting, actually. And it's provided a route really for some startups to accelerate things to market. And as Richard's just highlighted, for the ones who know the method of working really well, to be able to act and use their network and move things, very quickly to sort of CE marked product and do that sort of thing. But it's also, for some companies, it's actually delayed them significantly. And so conversations that they got with investors have been stalled completely because their projects are more or less shelved as a result of the crisis. And that's particularly difficult, actually. There's no real way out of that, although there's been a few little bits of funding to try and help sort of sustain those companies until the pandemic subsides. for some projects, there's no real way of restarting them. So those companies are a little bit in limbo. And from an investor point of view, until they reach the point where they're investable and their technology is proven to a sufficient level, then there's no conversation to continue really. So it's a holding pattern, and that's really unfortunate. I worry for those companies really, because running a startup is a particularly hard thing in the first place. You've got to have a lot of tenacity to be successful, and a situation like a global pandemic is really damaging. It's not all bad news though, because some startups have seen completely the opposite, and where they've been in the right place and looking for funding and starting to get to the point of being able to scale, they've been able to hitch their wagon, so to speak, to COVID-specific funding sometimes, and really accelerate what they've been doing. And so we've worked with a few companies that have managed to go from sort of an MVP stage, a minimum viable product stage, to roll out over a few months because they've had a big injection of COVID-specific funding. And that's been really helpful. So those companies, right place, right time, and really lucky in that way. That's made them more investable in the long term. It's helped accelerate their business models. It's not without problems though, because as we heard in the keynote, one of the big things is to gather evidence. And it's okay accelerating a business to market, but it needs to be able to gather good quality evidence on its way. And that's a key thing for investors. You want to reduce the risk. You want to make sure that it's going to be scalable, and without evidence to say that that's possible, then that creates an issue as well. So it's turmoil all around, really. Some good, some bad. But I think for the right sort of entrepreneurs, they're very tenacious. It's creating some new opportunities, and those with established networks, it's creating opportunities. The very early stage, though, that's particularly difficult.
Okay,
so
great.
I would say, for companies that are at the point where they're looking for investment, keep having the conversations, because actually that's what it's all about. Keep trying to move things forward. But if your projects are stalled, talk to the potential investors and tell them where you're at. Be open and honest about it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Have you seen many sort of startups come out during the pandemic? So they've seen that obviously COVID has hit, and then now they're trying to get sort of immediate funding. What advice would you give to those sorts of companies?
So with the exception of things like the COVID funding, usually there is no such thing as immediate funding. So almost all projects take time to evolve, develop, and try and derive funding for. And we do a lot of work in sort of early stage, taking early stage research and trying to turn that into market ready product, and going through all those stages. So we often use grant funding as a way of doing that, and that helps reduce the risk and makes companies more investable later down the line. So it increases their chance of success as they go. And the companies that are able to sort of grasp the opportunity and spot those little bits of funding, and I'm sure there'll be more of that type of funding coming, because it's kind of woken everyone up to doing things more virtually, more digitally, better monitoring, better remote working, better remote monitoring as well, better social care in home with in-home devices. So there's lots of things that have moved forward quite quickly as a result of sort of people getting familiar with the technology capabilities that are out there. So you see, my daughter's just brought me a cup of tea. That's fantastic, isn't it? Well trained. Couldn't have timed that better. But so I think tenacity is the operative word, really. It always is in a startup, but tenacity and sort of looking out for those opportunities to repurpose technology, to get involved exactly like PDM did. That's a call to arms. And if you've got business or partners that can support that, that's a great way to get going.
Lovely. Thanks for that, Ian. Really insightful. Okay, so moving over to Mary. Looking from the sort of the NHS sort of healthcare sector point of view, could you share a bit more insight around how the SSP, or sort of about the SSP, and how you've embraced the technological innovations to improve your capabilities in-house?
Thanks, Matt. I think we can all agree that it's been an extraordinary year with everything that's happened, and we've got to give credit really to those frontline heroes who continue to do put themselves out there, and to those who've lost families and loved ones, reaching out to those people. But credit as well to colleagues in academia and industry and the health sector. If anything, one of our key strengths in the last year or so has been this phenomenal collaboration. Everybody, boundaries were removed, and everybody just got together to make things happen. And as colleagues have sort of alluded to, there's been this rapid pace of digital transformation in the health sector, well, disruption even in the health sector, which has been long coming, but it's taken a crisis to get to where we're at. But I think it's looking at that now and thinking how we move forward, how we harness the learning from all that's happened, and not take a step back, because obviously digital innovation and technologies have come to the forefront in terms of helping us to be able to continually provide those services. From a shared services point of view, the nature of the services that we provide is such that, it's a sort of professional services. So you're talking employment services, payroll, recruitment, procurement, and I know Richard was talking about PPE and stuff like that. I mean, some people have been living and breathing that for the last year now, and just sourcing those important equipment that we need. So it was, for us, it was very important to keep that function ticking, so that frontline staff can focus on what is important. So the last thing, just as a very simple example, is, you don't want not to have to pay doctors and dentists and everybody that's been doing that work. So payroll has to keep moving. So our focus initially has been around remote working. So we had to very quickly deploy hundreds of devices and make sure that people can work remotely and continue to provide those important and essential back-end services to the frontline staff and to organizations across NHS Wales. We sort of deployed Office 365 and any enabling functionality to support remote working. But on a wider scale within NHS Wales, there's been this shift, very significant shift to remote consultations. Over 75,000 remote patient consultations, and I think that's mirrored really across the health sector, however you look at that. And there's been very positive feedback from patients. So there's been that, there's been surveys and feedback mechanisms, and I think certainly we don't see things going back to the old way of working. I think there's now going to be more investment in that area. And new approaches, so to speak. We already see one of our health boards, Cardiff Vale, for instance, where, for the emergency services, there are new things being put in place where you have to ring for phone in first before you go in, so that it's targeted then. So people don't just turn up at the A&E department, but before they turn up, you know who's going to see them. And systems are put in place so that, again, it's about limiting contact. But at the same time, it's harnessing technology. We've seen now what is possible, and we haven't seen it all. And I think certainly to move forward, it is about that continued partnership between academia, research, industry, the health sector. We need to keep that going, because I think what we've done in the last almost a year now has been extraordinary, and I think that we can keep doing that. What the last couple of months has taught us as well, and is around resilience. There is something there. I know earlier on in the keynote, Sir John talked about was giving some insightful reflection on diagnostics. But it's about resilience. What have we done now? And let's build on that, because we need to build on that resilience and make sure that we don't know what's around the corner. Nobody wants anything else, bad to happen. But I think it's sustaining that. I think the question is, having got to where we are now, how do we sustain and keep that momentum? We know what good could look like. There is so much opportunity in AI now, and you can talk about automation. So how do we harness that, and how do we sustain the resilience and the opportunities presented by the challenges we've had? How do we tap into those? And I think that continued strong and joined up collaboration between all sectors is going to be key for us going forward.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Mary. So I guess I want to throw another question out to the audience. Something that you mentioned there, Mary, about having to adapt and innovate, and then realizing that we're not going to go back to the old ways because this new way is so much better. So I'm going to put that to the panel. What sort of experiences like that have you had throughout the pandemic, where you've sort of looked at an old way of doing things and thought, well, this is a bit redundant now. We've had to change and embrace this new technology and harness it. So whoever wants to go sort of first on that one? Yeah, Richard.
So, for me, it's the obvious thing. So it's taking things online. So at the start of the pandemic, I was a bit concerned about how we would adopt Zoom and Teams. So, I mean, we'd used it before, but developing a product or a device is a three-dimensional process. So one of my concerns or observations was, how do we develop products in a remote kind of environment when we're talking about a physical entity, a physical manifestation? And we seem to have kind of got through that with less resistance than what I'd anticipated. So that's kind of been a good thing, where we've needed to, send samples out to clients. We adopt virtual reality as part of our development for getting on a year now. So I was surprised about how agile the business was in terms of adapting to the new normal. One of the biggest takeouts for us, really.
Okay, great. Thanks, Richard. Anyone else want to contribute to that point? Yep, Ian.
So I think there's been a big psychological boost to what Richard's just said across most organisations, actually. So it turns out that people didn't like trudging into offices very much, actually, and trekking up and down the country to meetings. And so because it's been forced upon everyone because of the situation, the adoption of new technology has been, and the willingness to put up with the little gremlins and glitches, and I've heard conference calls referred to as the 2020 version of a séance. Are you there? Can you hear me? Oh, you're frozen, sort of thing. But I think the fact that everybody's had to do it all at the same time has just pushed things forward amazingly well, and it's stopped people who were perhaps resistant to it actually putting up barriers because they've had no option. Yeah,
definitely. Cool. Mary. Yeah, we'll go Mary.
Yeah, I was going to just echo what Richard and Ian have said there. There's been these significant shifts to remote and virtual ways of working. I think in the past, when we thought, patients, they wouldn't like, maybe they don't want remote or consultations, but when we were, necessity, they say. So we've had to move very quickly. But we found that patients have embraced these new ways of working. People are so used to that now. It's just a call. You don't have to. You don't have to leave work. You don't have to book half a day off or a whole day off to go for an appointment. And certainly, I think there is, in terms of learning, there's opportunity there in terms of chronic disease management. There is a major opportunity, really. In outpatients, I can see a lot of transformation work happening now across the country around outpatients, rethinking and reimagining elective care and some remote appointments. So there's a major shift coming, and I'm really excited about that. There is also, I mean, in NHS Wales, for instance, within a couple of weeks, one of the things we did was to roll out Teams across the old patch. That was a significant piece of work, and there was, everybody just said, let's get on with it. And it's become so common now that, there's hardly most of the meetings and events are done remotely. I think I struggle to remember the days where we now convene in this massive hall with 1,000 people for a conference. It's all online now. So yeah, I think that has been a big shift for us, and we are continuing to move things forward. But certainly, we need to harness those opportunities presented. We can't afford to go back to old ways of working.
Yeah, completely agree. Cool. Phil, if you want to finish that off.
Yeah, just quickly, I think with an emphasis on avoiding transmission and infection, I think an increased interest in non-invasive devices for both diagnostics and treatment delivery is an important development. So, for example, there's developments in blood glucose monitoring which are non-invasive. So this really involves the use of the electromagnetic spectrum and acoustics and maybe some thermal based technologies. And then the other thing is what Sir John was saying there about the use of proteomics, a single blood test to replace lots of single-use devices. That is an excellent example of application of the first priority in the circular economy, which is to reduce or eliminate the need for something. So I think that's a really good development, which is obviously spurred on by COVID. Okay,
thank you. Oh, go on.
While people were talking, I was just reflecting on how long this technology has been around, actually, and I was involved in a telehealth trial, as it was called back then, where patients could dial into a diabetes centre at Airedale Hospital in West Yorkshire back in 2008. So the technology has existed since then. The feedback was exactly what Mary's just highlighted about the users, the patients love it, reduced travelling time, better engagement with the clinicians, etc., etc. Clinicians liked it as well. But building the business case to show its effectiveness at scale was very difficult to prove. And in fact, the government's put repeated monies behind trying to develop telehealth programs at scale, and they've all failed to date. It only took a pandemic to make it work.
There we go. It's forcing people to adopt to it. Richard.
Just to follow on from Ian's comments, really. So I'm just doing a research paper in digital tech and spent some time with Dr. Neville Young from AHSN about digital tech. There's been more uptake of digital tech or implementation in the last 8 months than the last 10 years, which reflects what Ian was saying. The thing that interests me is that with the development of vital signs technologies and in the next, this coming on now with a smartphone being enabled to monitor vital signs, I think, I'm kind of interested in where that technology is going to go, and less people in hospital, more at distance kind of telehealth appointments that will be more effective. So I think it's kind of a new dawn. The interesting thing is really equality in the next 5 or 10 years when that's implemented, and would it create a two-tier health system? But that's a debate for another time, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Thanks for that, everyone. Really insightful panel. What I'm going to do is open it up to the audience now. We have one question from Ravi Kumar, CEO of CyberLiver. He asks, can you please give some examples where the funding and purchasing streams are aligning with the future of MedTech business model? Can you please give some examples of where the funding and purchasing streams are aligning with the future of MedTech business models? Who wants to take that one first?
I think that's probably question.
Actually, getting funding and purchasing streams to align is like black magic. Actually, it's a special thing, and what it does relate to really is the value of the AHSNs and the NIHR mix. So if you go and work with those organisations early on, then you've got half a chance of getting your project and your collaborators to the right point with the right purchasing to start to open up the opportunities. And then the AHSNs are the way that you start to scale that as well. So there is no one answer. It's, as I say, it's an art, but good collaboration is definitely the key to it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Mary, is that? Yeah, go on, Mary.
I can unmute, that would be great. Just following on from what Ian said, and I think V touched on this, V Mafundi touched on this in the at the start of the event. So yes, certainly I agree with Ian. Have a look at those organizations. NHIR is seen as one of those, and also I think NHS England is looking at some funding approaches now around MedTech. I know there was a consultation late last year, early in the year. Certainly in Wales, one of the things that Welsh government did towards late last year, which I was involved with as a panel member, there was a digital solutions fund. Yes, it was sort of tagged and aligned with the COVID and pandemic, but I think the key themes around that was remote diagnosis and triage of patients, optimizing data, which we haven't touched on today, but it's about optimizing data as well as part of this, and tracking and managing, all geared towards some remote citizen support and empowering citizens and patients. So I think there is certainly something about the funding stream from government and digital ecosystems. Within Wales, digital health ecosystem, again, work very closely with the healthcare organizations and the Welsh government around funds. So it's having a look at what is available and out there, and certainly collaboration, I have to agree, is going to be key.
Okay, great. And then over to you, Phil.
Just a very quick point. When we were preparing our funding proposal, I tried to get access to the model hospital data, but because we're outside the NHS, I couldn't really do that. But I would recommend looking at the model hospital for organisations that are within or connected to the NHS.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And I think we've got one more question from Gavin. What might we lose when we lose face-to-face? So what implications could going remote, sort of the majority of work, lead to? Anyone want to take that?
I guess, as Gavin said in his further comments. Sorry.
Oh, there a bit of a. Who was speaking? Was that echo, or was that Richard speaking as well?
It was me and Richard, I think. So there must have been a bit of lag. He's disappeared as well.
Okay.
So I think, as Gavin said in his further comment, online is great until it comes to administering a vaccine or delivering some treatments. It's absolutely right. Digital, virtual can't do everything. It obviously can't do everything. What I do think is happening now is I'm seeing conversations from community health. It might be that actually things are pushed out more to be more localized, to be more localized delivery. So, for instance, they were talking about pharmacists being able to deliver vaccinations because, of course, they carry the medicines and they've got the facilities and they're trained as well. So there are obvious instances where you could roll some things out and decentralize a little bit and perhaps improve efficiencies. But you can't ever replace face-to-face, I don't think. Augment it, yes, but replace it now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, Ian. Richard, if you want to take...
I think well-being is one... Hello?
Oh, yeah, can hear you.
Yeah. I think well-being is one aspect to be mindful of. We have a studio where there's 5 of us, and we've not all been in the same room for a year. Whilst we are managing, it's fair to say that a lot of people are fatigued. So I think it will come back in some aspects. I think the new normal will be a hybrid of potentially virtual events, but also physical events. I think authenticity is an aspect to consider as well. There's nothing better than having kind of human contact. I think for some people, lockdown has been less impactful than others. But I guess the reality is, when you're doing business and working with clients and stakeholders, that sometimes you do need to have that personal touch. So I don't think things will ever go back to how they were. I think people will just be working smarter and a hybrid, more agile process.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I think I completely agree with that point. I guess that calls this roundtable to an end. I think we're out of time with it. So thank you very much for being on the panel and sharing your insight with the audience.
You're welcome. Thank you.